Hi! Sorry about my voice. Allergies are getting the better of me, and it sucks. I am so sorry that I have been gone for so long. I would love to give you a great excuse as to why that's happened, but my only excuse is that my ADHD brain lost the book for a little while. I'm not even joking. I literally just found it today in a laundry basket because for some reason my brain was like, we should put it there. You'll remember where it is. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I didn't remember at all where I had put it. Anyway, so I saw a couple of comments today that were like, I can't wait for the next chapter. And I was like, I know, me too. So I found it. Anyway, I am going to be reading the next chapter to you. It's called By the River Drell. If you hear noises in the background, I have cats. I have a fan going because it's summer and it's hot, and I'm currently dog sitting, so he does make quite a bit of noise, but he is so cute. Anyway, I digress. Like I said, we're going to be reading the next chapter in our book, In the Hand of the Goddess by Tamora Pierce, in the Song of the Lioness Quartet. It is chapter 5, By the River Drell. If you have any comments or suggestions, give me a shout in the comments. I do actually read all of them, because I love all of you, and I want you to feel heard. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? Chapter 5, By the River Drell. The men who defended Fort Drell until the arrival of the king's forces were camped below the Drell Falls, waiting for Prince Jonathan. The fact that they were veteran soldiers showed in the neatness of the camp and in the prepared look of the men. Alanna felt better when she saw them. She had a feeling these grim-faced commoners would fight well. They had spared her the work of putting up tents for Jonathan and Miles, which she appreciated. One of the soldiers, a ram, told her he was to look after the horses. All Alanna had to do was lay out Jonathan's and Miles's things, as she would be looking after both of her friends on the campaign. When noon came, Alanna was starving. She could ride down to the fort to eat with John, Miles, and the other knights gathered there for war councils, but she was sure she would die of hunger before she got that far. Leaving Faithful to nap on her cot, she searched the camp until she found the mess tent. The quest was easy. She followed her nose. After filling her plate with beans and meat, Alanna sat at one of the long tables. The place on her right was soon occupied by a large foot soldier. His muscles bulged under his sturdy clothing, filling Alanna with envy, and his tanned and weathered face was framed by a thick red beard. The others greeted him eagerly, and the giant answered in a deep, rumbling voice. Alanna applied herself to her meal and listened to every word. "What news of the enemy, Thor?" one man asked. "No news," the giant boomed. They're sitting as quiet as rabbits when the hunters by. Perhaps they'll have heard of our reinforcements." Since only a blind man could have missed 1,000 men and knights who had poured into the Tortalian camps that morning, this sally was granted with roars of laughter. "That'll hold them a bit," a ratty-looking man agreed when the tent had quieted. "And you know who's in command here at the falls?" "His Highness the Prince!" The man called Thor frowned. "And this the Prince's first war command? Else they think the enemy's not planning much up this way. Mayhap the Toussaint needed a rest from us," someone joked. Laughing with them, Alanna choked on a bean. She coughed and swore, her eyes watering. A huge hand beating on her back nearly broke her spine. "There, little fella. Something got down the wrong pipe?" Thor asked. Alanna gasped for breath, trying to grin into the giant's bright blue eyes. Thor stared at her. "Will you look?" he whispered. "The tyke has purple lamps." The others crowded around to see. Alanna stared back at them with wide eyes, blushing. And where might you be from? Thor wanted to know. Alanna regained her breath. I came with the new troops this morning. Aren't you a mite young to be going to war? The ratty-looking man asked. Alanna stiffened proudly. I'm 16 next month. Nay, he replied with disbelief. You ain't more'n 12. A ram pushed through the crowd and nodded to her. No, he's near 16, well enough. He's the prince's squire. I'm looking after their horses. How did a wee fella like you get to be the prince's own squire? Thor asked as the others muttered among themselves. That wee fella, someone said coldly, is one of the best fencers at court. He beat a full Tisane knight in a duel last year, all by himself. Alanna felt her hackles rising at the unknown man's tone. Thor looked up, scowling. So, you're back, Gem Tanner. Always full of the news, aren't you? A young man with a nasty smile sauntered over to their table. Alanna thought he might be good-looking if his eyes weren't so cold. As it was. Enjoy your association with us common folks, squire. She didn't like him. I was. Leave the lad be, someone protested. I just want to make sure he takes a good report back to his masters. What were you talking about? How much you like being left to hold Fort Drell until the enemy was so entrenched that it'll take 1,000 armies to dig them out? Your opinion of the king's tactics? The king's personal habits, perhaps? Alanna stood, her face white with anger. I spy for no one. You remember that, Gem Tanner, she snapped, and keep a civil tongue in your head. The man laughed. Big words, little fellow. A large hand weighed Alanna down. Softly, lad, Thor told her. He turned to Gem. You're right quick to pick fights with stranger lads who are better raised than you. When will you be so quick to pick a fight with me? Gem sneered. I was doing you a favor, warning you of the royal spy in your midst. My stupid friends. He left the tent. Alanna drew deep breaths, fighting down her temper. The men reassured her that Gem was mean, that his words meant nothing. Only Thor was silent. Are you spying for His Highness? The big man wanted to know. Alanna grabbed her plate. I was eating my lunch. I guess I'll do that somewhere else from now on. Thor grinned and pulled her back into her seat. Steady there, squire. Can you blame us for wanting to know? Spare me a noble's pride. Give us the news from the capital instead. The routine at the Falls camp was simple. Alanna looked after John and Miles in the morning, making sure their tents were clean and their belongings neat. She helped the ram groom the horses, taking Moonlight out for a morning ride. She ate her meals with the men. It always seemed like too much trouble to ride to the fort and join the knights. If she realized she was avoiding Duke Roger, she mentioned it to no one. In the afternoon, she exercised, learning tricks of spear and axe fighting from Big Thor and his friends. She could hold her own among them when it came to knife fighting, and she could teach them a thing or two about the use of a sword. All things considered, she felt this was a fair exchange. Often, Miles returned in the afternoon. She had history lessons from him then, something she had always enjoyed. As she got older, Miles' practical way of looking at things made more and more sense. After the evening meal, her friends, who were knights, rode on patrols. Miles and Jonathan returned to the fort to discuss tactics with Roger. Alanna remained in camp with her new friends. With Big Thor as her guide, she learned many interesting things during those long, firelit evenings. How to play dice without losing every copper she had, songs that would make the hardiest palace stableman turn pale. Even when to keep quiet and listen. Wherever Alanna turned, day or night, Big Thor was looking after her. It was Thor who kept her from losing her temper when Jem Tanner sharpened his tongue on her, something that young man often did. Thor showed her crafty ways to handle the big weapons, the spear and the axe. On nights when the large man had riverbank guard duty, he told her stories about his days as a blacksmith in the southern hills, then as a soldier for the king. In the 2 weeks after the new troops came to the valley, a number of skirmishes were fought up and down the river. There were never any direct attacks on the fort, but Hamrith and Imra both saw daylight action. Alanna, kept at Jonathan's camp, did not fight, but the prince did. Once when he was visiting once when he was visiting Earl Hamrith, once when he was inspecting Lord Imra's men. Alanna always knew when there was fighting downriver, but she never could have joined her night master in time. Besides, good soldiers didn't leave their posts to fight somewhere else. The enemy could attack the undefended camp. Alanna could only wait and chew her nails, wondering if any of them, John, Drell, Gary, or Miles, would come back. Finally, one morning she went to Duke Baird. The healer's tent lay in a broad white swath behind the fort, touched by every path that led along the river. Baird himself was taking a moment's rest when Alanna arrived. The latest fight was over, and the beds were filled with wounded and dying men. "I'm useless upriver," she told the chief healers flatly. "There's only John's or Miles's armor to clean, and I can't clean it while they're wearing it. If I don't do something, I'll scream." The Duke looked at her. "You like to be busy, don't you, Squire Allen?" "I don't like to waste my time. Is that the same thing?" Duke Baird picked up a white robe and tossed it to her. "Come, I certainly won't turn you away." Alanna followed the Duke from bed to bed, doing what he told her to do. If she had ever had a good opinion of war, it vanished by afternoon. Men died as she watched, and they didn't care about what they had fought for. They only cared about pain and the Dark God's arrival. Alanna could only help a little. She didn't notice how much time had passed until the torches were lit. The daylight was nearly gone, and she was starting to tire. Each time she used her healing gift, she exhausted herself a little more, but she couldn't stop, not while men were suffering. Prince Jonathan found her bandaging a man's arm. "A fellow called Big Thor told me you were here. What are you doing?" It took her a moment to realize someone was talking to her. "What? Oh, John." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a bloody streak. "I'm keeping busy." "Faithful is going crazy. Miles says Faithful's afraid you'll kill yourself." Jonathan spotted Duke Baird. "Oh, Grace, how long has Alan been here?" The healer glanced at Alanna. "Great Mithros, lad! I should have sent you away hours ago. You don't have the training to work so hard. Prince Jonathan, get him out of here." "Nonsense!" Alanna protested, her ears roaring now that her concentration was broken. "I'm as fit as—" She stumbled, and John caught her. "You certainly are," he said dryly, ignoring her protests. He steered her out of the tent. "He's been here all day?" he asked Baird, who followed them. The Duke nodded. "And he's saved more men than I can count. Go to bed, lad," he ordered Alanna. "You've done more than your share here. The worst is over." Alanna was still arguing as John mounted darkness and swung her up before him. "My, you're a quarrelsome little fellow," he murmured in her ear as they set off. You're dead on your feet. Why didn't you stop?" Alanna leaned back against her prince, feeling very tired. Darkness, ignoring the double burden, picked his way along the river path. "They needed help," she rasped. Jonathan nodded to Imra's sentries as they bypassed the camp. "Why did you have to go there in the first place?" "I wasn't useful where I was," she sighed gratefully, glad for his strong arm around her. She murmured. "I said, must you always be useful?" "Yes." They rode on silently for a few moments before John remarked thoughtfully, "Perhaps I could make myself useful there too, instead of attending a lot of meetings where Roger makes the decisions and never asks how I feel. Think it's worth a try." Alanna yawned, half turning her head so it was tucked under Jonathan's chin. "Anything's worth a try." A yowl in the darkness greeted them as Faithful informed Alanna, "Healing is all very well, but not if you kill yourself in the process. Do you enjoy snuggling up to Jonathan like a lovesick girl?" Alanna sat bolt upright. "Now you listen to me, you prissy animal," she began. "Your Highness, you're back late." Jem Tanner, a spear in his hand, stepped out of the woods. "And Squire Allen, gadding about all day?" "You've got guard duty, Jem Tanner," Alanna snapped, aware that Jonathan was tight with anger. "Then guard." Faithful leapt into Alanna's lap as they rode on, startling Darkness not a bit. "Who was that?" Jonathan asked quietly. "One of the men from camp. Being nasty is his hobby. You were warning me about him, weren't you, Faithful?" "If you're going to fall in love with the prince, don't show it," the cat advised, "unless you want the whole camp talking about you both." "I am not Alanna stopped, aware that Jonathan was listening intently, one of his arms still around her waist. "Are you two talking?" he wanted to know. "Ask Faithful." Alanna said tersely. "I just answer his questions." A soldier came forward to take Darkness as they entered their own camp. Miles summoned the prince to his tent, and Alanna was left alone with her thoughts. She kept remembering the men she tried to heal, with their terrible wounds and the glazed look of pain in their eyes. She remembered every cut, every broken bone, until her stomach began to roll. She couldn't make herself think of anything else. Her body rebelled. She rushed out of the back of the tent where the little she had eaten that day came up violently. She struggled to be quiet. She wanted no one to witness her shame. Warriors were not supposed to throw up at the sight of blood and dying. Cool hands soothed her head, steadying her. When she stopped heaving, John gave her a dipper full of water. Gratefully, she splashed some on her face and rinsed her mouth out. "If Faithful told you, I'll skin him," she whispered hoarsely. "No," John replied. "I was coming back and I heard you." "You must think I'm an awful sissy." There was silence for a moment, then he replied, "I threw up after my first skirmish." She looked at her friend, startled. "You never!" He nodded. "I did. I just didn't have anyone to hold my head for me." He ruffled her hair. "Don't tell the men, will you?" "I won't tell if you won't." "Done." He held open the flap of the tent. It wouldn't do for them to think we're sissies, would it? Just 2 nights later, Alanna was looking for Big Thor. His spear needed replacing, and she had one from a man who had died in the healer's tent. The watch captain told her Thor and Jem Tanner had guard duty on the wooded point of land just below the camp, and Alanna set out to meet them. Lugging the too large spear, it was late. Everyone but the sentries was gone to bed. The night pressed in as she left the camp behind. She could hear animals in the nearby trees, even Faithful's soft patting as he walked beside her. Suddenly, the cat dashed into the trees that screened Alanna from Thor's guard post. Frowning, Alanna followed. She was remembering that Jonathan had objected to this little wood that was isolated the point so effectively. The enemy could easily cross here and pick off Jonathan's and Imra's men if the sentries were unable to give the warning. Things would be easier for everyone if the trees were chopped down. Roger had talked the prince out of it, saying he didn't want the men tired out with wood cutting if the enemy attacked, which they did almost every day. His words were reasonable, and John had given in. Faithful, yowling a warning to Alanna before she left the shelter of the wood. She ducked behind a big oak and peered at the sentry's post, listening. Thor was not at his station. Neither was Jem Tanner. Instead, 3 men in dark clothing stood on the point. One was lighting a torch while another fitted an arrow to his bow. Faithful yelled again in fury as he positioned himself between the 3 and Alanna's hiding place. He hissed evilly, his violet eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Cursed beast," the bowman whispered as he let his arrow fly. It thudded into the oak's trunk, missing the cat. "Stop it!" the 3rd man ordered. The one with the torch was waving it over his head, signaling to the opposite bank. "Don't make so much noise!" Alanna heard oars splashing in the river. She didn't wait to hear more. Dropping the spear, she quietly made her way free of the wood, Faithful at her heels. Once clear, she ran for all she was worth to the next guard post on the way to John's camp. "Sound your horn!" she yelled to the men there as soon as she drew within earshot. She dropped beside them, panting. "Something's happened to Thor and Tanner! The enemy's crossing!" The men sounded the alarm. Other horns in both camps took up calls as Alanna ran on to Jonathan, sending one of the sentries to alert the captains. The prince was dressing when she arrived. "What's up?" he asked, shrugging into his mail. Alanna told him as she handed over his weapon and helmet. Miles came in, looking odd in plate armor. "A messenger just got in. Imra lost 2 guards as well," he said without formality. "The Chisane is mounting a major attack between our camps. They're going to split us right down the middle. The men from the fort may get here too late." "We'll see," John said grimly. "Have the men form a half circle around the point. We'll shove them off our ground, then help Imra. You on, Miles. I'm contacting Roger." Alanna hurried outside with Miles to saddle his horse. "What's he doing?" the knight asked as she worked. "Magic." She checked the cinches on Miles' saddle. The horse caught her tightly, held excitement, fidgeting under her touch. Alanna gave Miles a hand up. "He'll send to Roger in the fire." "Very handy," Miles approved, gripping the reins. He settled the mask of his helmet over his face and kicked his horse into a gallop. Alanna saddled Darkness, smiling grimly. It seemed even a scholar, like Sir Miles, became a warrior when it was necessary. Faithful yelled at her feet when she led Jonathan's stallion around the tent. "No," she said firmly. "You remain here. I won't have you hacked in two by someone. You can go up by the falls and watch for more trouble there, but stay away from the fighting." Evidently, the cat realized she meant it. He trotted away, his tail high. Jonathan stepped from the tent and jumped onto Darkness's back, a shimmering silver ghost on a black horse. "I take it you told Faithful to stay out of the fighting?" Alanna double-checked the cinches of Darkness's saddle. No one would ever fall from a horse she had readied. He may even obey me for a change. A strong hand gripped her shoulder, and she looked up into Jonathan's worried face. I guess I can't tell you I can't tell you the same, can I? He whispered. The biggest attack this summer, and I'm supposed to hide in my tent? She asked, astonished. And me, your squire? Are you out of your mind? Trumpets were blowing, telling them the enemy was there in force. But Jonathan still hesitated. His sapphire eyes were bright. Against one warrior, I can't worry about you. You've proven you can handle yourself. But against an army? She covered his hand with hers. I have my duty, Highness, and this is my home too. I'm trained to defend it, and defend it I will. Jonathan sighed, putting on his helmet. You know where to find me when you're armed. He urged darkness out. Alanna didn't waste time wondering about this strange new protectiveness in John. Instead, she hurried to get ready. She had no armor, having refused the plate armor the weapons master in the palace had offered her. Plate was much too heavy. Now she pulled on a quilt-lined leather breeches and jacket. Most foot soldiers wore the same. She was already wearing lightning in her dagger. She stopped only to grab a shield and a short axe before hurrying outside once more. Moonlight pawed the ground, sensing action. Alanna cooed soothingly to the mare as she rapidly saddled her. We've got to protect Jonathan in darkness, don't we? She swung herself onto Moonlight's back. Let's go. As one of the last fighters to the point, Alanna could clearly see that the enemy had advanced past the trees, engaging John's men in the clearing around the main path. She glimpsed Jonathan's silver and sapphire gleaming in the thick of the battle as darkness reared to fight as well. Miles was beside the prince, and Gary and Rawl flanked them both. The enemy would have trouble hurting the prince or his advisor unless they could get past two very big knights. The patterns of the battle moved and changed before her eyes beneath the flickering torches, and Alanna clenched her teeth till her jaw hurt. The Toussaint had gotten past the Tortallans as Jonathan's back. Coming around the prince and his friends in a pincers, shaking her head to clear it, Alanna rose in her saddle and drew lightning. To me! Men of Fort Drell! She yelled furiously. To me! Her friends swarmed after her, following as she charged into the thick of fighting. The Toussaints, surprised by the unexpected attack, turned to face the slender, angry youth on the golden white mare. They found themselves attacked by a troop of very tough foot soldiers and forced to give way as the youth urged his companions on. Alan! Someone yelled. The knight! She brought her shield up instantly, just in time to intercept a hard blow from a mace. Her shield buckled a little, then held. Alanna swore as her shield arm went numb and wheeled Moonlight to face her first mounted attacker. The enemy knight was big, and he wore thick plate armor as if it was made of air. It was a struggle for her to just ward off his mace. Gripping Moonlight's reins in her teeth, she guided the well-trained mare with her knees alone, watching for an opening. As the knight lifted both arms to deliver the blow that would shatter her shield and her arm, she saw her chance. Swiftly, Alanna slid lightning into the opening between the knight's arm and chest armor, thrusting deep. Within a gasp of surprise, her enemy fell from his horse, dead. Alanna had no time now to stop and think about the first man she had killed. John was still in danger. She pressed forward again, the men from her camp behind her. She threw her now useless shield into the face of an attacking knight, running him through while he was blinded. Another knight rode to engage her, swinging a two-handed sword. Alanna nudged Moonlight to the side, gripping her axe in her left hand and lightning in her right. She tried to circle this new attacker. Turtle! The cry was loud and fierce over the crash of weapons and men's scream. Turtle for Trebond! Alanna's attacker glanced at Jonathan, who was battering his way towards Alanna. Taking a chance, Alanna sent the big sword flying, wounding the knight in the shoulder with the same thrust. She pushed onto John's side, placing herself between him and Miles. The men formed a circle around them all, keeping the enemy back. Alanna scanned the area for more trouble. In spite of the men and knights around her prince, she felt real danger was nearby. Something glinted in the trees, catching her eye. An archer stood in a maple, his arrow already on his string. His target was Jonathan. Alanna yelled and threw herself to one side, knocking John half off the saddle. The arrow glanced off the prince's shield, and one of the Tatalian archers picked the enemy bowman out of the tree. Alanna pulled herself upright, feeling dizzy and tired. Her left arm, her shield arm, hurt terribly. Jonathan hauled himself back into the saddle with Miles's help, looking at her with gratitude. "Thanks," he said. "You—" He was interrupted by the sound of blowing horns. Hundreds of fresh men in Tortalan colors poured into the clearing, led by Duke Roger. The new troops pushed the enemy back into the woods and onto the point, leaving Jonathan's people to catch their wind. When the Duke of Conte returned, his neat hair was mussed and a bloody scratch ran down one side of his face. "They took to their boats," he said with a grimace. "We can't follow. Remember my uncle's orders." The men began to disperse, to look after the wounded and the dead. Alanna waited where she was, shifting anxiously in her saddle. It was time to look for one man in particular. Her shoulder gave a sharp, agonizing pull, and she nearly fainted with pain. Its source was a deep gash down her arm. Someone had wounded her without her realizing it. She needed to bandage the cut soon, but right now it was more important to attend to business. She spotted the watch captain among the healers and wounded, and made her way over to him on moonlight. "Where's Big Thor?" she asked bluntly. The gray-haired man looked up at her. "I'm afraid something happened to him, Squire Allen. I've been searching." He gestured to the battlefield around them. "There's no body. Nothing. Jem Tanner wandered into camp at the start of it all, with a lump on his noggin saying Thor knocked him out." Alanna studied Moonlight, who was fretting at the scent of blood from the wounded. "Jem Tanner accused Big Thor of going over to the enemy?" The captain nodded grimly. "I don't believe him. I know Thor. He served under me these 5 years. Thor don't have a treacherous bone in his body. Jem Tanner does." Alanna frowned. "Find Jem Tanner and hold him on my orders." The captain bowed. "As you say, Squire Allen." Alanna glanced at the stand of trees, holding her wounded arm. Thor hadn't been with the enemy, or she would have heard of it by now. What if Thor had been the one betrayed, not Jem? She thought hard. If Thor was dazed or hurt, where would he go? Toward the camp? Along the riverbank, perhaps. She urged Moonlight up to the point, where still more wounded and dying men laying on the ground. Thor would be noticeable from size alone. He wasn't there. Carefully, she scanned the ground until she saw what she was looking for. Something heavy had been dragged down the river near the sentry post. Guiding Moonlight down the slope to the water's edge, she found a clump of bushes where the heavy thing had come to rest. Moonlight sniffed the dark stain on the earth there, and shied away with alarm. Dismounting with difficulty, Alanna picked up some of the stained dirt and smelled it. Lately, she had become too familiar with this smell. It was blood. Dizziness made her grab Moonlight's mane, fighting to stand upright. Clenching her teeth, she found the brandy flask in one saddlebag and opened it, taking a large swallow. The harsh mouthful made her cough and sputter, but her head cleared again. She put the flask away, thinking. Thor was hurt. She knew if this blood was his, He was badly hurt, and she couldn't waste time. Closing her eyes, she reached inside herself for the fire of her gift. She opened her hand and let the magic flow into her palm, making it glow with a brilliant white-purple light. Opening her eyes, she nodded with grim satisfaction. The light shining from her hand was far brighter than any torch, throwing the scene around her into high relief. The effort made her head spin, but she hung on. There would be plenty of time to collapse after she found Big Thor. Footprints were dark holes in the earth in front of her, leading north along the river to the camp, as she had suspected. With her free hand, Alanna tugged on Moonlight's reins, leading the mare forward as she strained to see the prints. Once she stopped to bind up her arm. She was losing a dangerous amount of blood, and the use of magic was tiring her more quickly than usual. But she was afraid that if she stopped looking, someone less kind might find Thor and kill him. When Moonlight halted, Alanna nearly fell. The mare was nuzzling a huge form lying half in and half out of the river. Alanna knelt stiffly by the body. "Thor?" she whispered. The man stirred and moaned. It was a struggle to turn him over using only one hand. Her wounded arm was useless for anything but her light. Finally, Moonlight helped, pushing with her nose. When they got Thor on his back, Alanna wished they hadn't. The man's voice was a whisper. "He blinded me." Have you some brandy?" Alanna opened her flask and carefully put it to his lips. He didn't have the strength to hold it himself. "'Twas Jem Tanner that betrayed us," Thor rasped. I don't know how. He was nervous from the moment we went on watch. There must have been a signal and he hit me over the head. When I came round, he touched his hand to his face. I was like this, and I could hear the horns blowing. While Thor talked, Alanna examined him with her gift, feeling the life slipping away from her friend. Even if his wounds had not been serious, he had lost too much blood to be healed by anyone now. "Can you help me?" Thor whispered. "I'd just like to go to sleep. I'm not tired." Alanna trembled. Healing was natural for her, but she had never killed a human being with her gift. She didn't think she could. Thor groped until his hands found her arms. You're hurt," he murmured, touching her already soaked bandage. "Nay. Look after your own wounds. I'm close enough now. Waiting for the Dark God a little longer won't matter." Alanna pressed her good hand to Thor's forehead, her gift lighting the clearing in a deep violet fire. "Sleep. Sleep, Thor," she whispered. She felt him falling away gently, slipping into a long dark well. Alanna rose. Thor's chest was still, and he was smiling. She smiled back at him, shakingly, and then the world spun. Her knees trembled and gave out. "Merciful Mother," she thought with disgust as she fell. "I overreached myself." A huge shadow figure was bending over her. "Thor, Thor," she sighed, recognizing the Dark God. "You want Thor." Reaching out a hand that was blacker than night, the god touched Alanna's eyes. She closed them. If this was death, she didn't care anymore. Okay, so that was the end of that chapter. If that chapter doesn't make you tear up, what, like, what kind of emotion do you have? Because I have been reading this book series, literally this book series, since I was 13 years old, and still, to this day, that one part where Thor is talking about telling her, don't waste her gift on him, that, the dark god is close now, that it's fine, he'll just, it's fine. And, like, still, to this day, I get all misty-eyed and everything listening to him, still trying to tell her not to do it, to use her gift on herself, right? And then she helps him sleep. And it's all real sad. And, also, I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I cuss like a, well-versed sailor. But, also, fuck Jem Tanner. Fuck that dude. Like, Tamora Pierce specifically talked about Thor's eyes, how crystal clear blue they are, right? This man blinded him, took his eyes. Excuse me, sir. I'm gonna need to take a couple of your bits off now. Yup. Your most favorite parts. Name them. And I'll take the opposite ones. You say your left arm, I'm saying your right. You say your left leg, I'm taking the right one. Yeah, that's how we're playing that game. Anybody named Jem? Sorry, can't trust you. Automatically on the no trust list. Anyway, tell me what your thoughts on the chapter. I know that you probably hear a lot of dog barking in the background. That's because Renzo hears noises outside, and he all of a sudden needs to call the alarm because he's a dog and doesn't know that locks exist. So, anyway. It is kind of late. I have to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I am going to bid you adieu. And I will try to upload another chapter this weekend, as long as I don't lose my book. Anyway, can love you. Bye.